play and call it work.
Hey everybody, Matthew here from MiniWarGaming.com, and welcome to the next episode of How to Play Warhammer 40k 8th Edition. Today's episode is going to cover the Psychic phase. This is where you get to activate your Psychers and use their abilities, and where your opponent, if they have Psychers, can try to deny those abilities so that they do not go off. The Psychic phase can be powerful, but it's more a utility phase. It is about dealing damage, but it's also about buffing and debuffing the various units out there. Not all armies will have Psychers, in which case you just skip the Psychic phase if you don't have any Psychers. This is probably the most common phase that is skipped, because usually you only have a couple Psychers, if any, in your entire army. Although there's some exceptions, Grey Knights, Tzeentch Demons, they love to have lots of Psychers. And of course there's the armies like the Tyranids or Genes that they call it that can have a lot of Psychers if they want to. Either way, if you don't have Psychers, skip this phase, but you should still probably learn how it works. So let's take a look. Most armies have access to Psychers of some form or another. For example, on the left we have our Imperium army of Astra Militarum, but we've borrowed a couple guys from the Astra Telepathica, a Primaris Psyker and an Astropath. On the right we've got our Death Guard, and in this case we've only got one Psyker on the table, which is the Malignant Plague Caster right here. However, he is a much more powerful Psyker than the two on this side of the table. In the individual data slates of the Psychers, it'll tell you how many psychic powers they know, whether or not they know the default Smite psychic power, which is just what everybody knows so far, and how many they are allowed to use per psychic phase, and how many deny the witch they can do in a psychic phase. For example, our Malignant Plague Caster, he knows 2 of his own Death Guard psychic powers plus Smite. On top of that, he is able to manifest 2 psychic powers in each friendly psychic phase and attempt to deny 1 psychic power in each enemy psychic phase. And when you actually go and build your army, you're allowed to just pick what psychic powers you know. It says you can either roll or you can pick, but I don't know why you'd ever just roll unless you don't know what they do, in which case you could randomize it, just so you don't have to sit there and try to figure them out until you actually go to use them. The Primaris Psyker, this good-looking guy right here, he can attempt to manifest 1 psychic power in each friendly psychic phase and attempt to deny 1 psychic power in each enemy psychic phase. He knows the Smite power and 2 psychic powers from his Psychana discipline, whereas the Astropath, he's almost exactly the same. He can use 1 power, he could deny 1 power, but he only knows Smite and 1 power. So make sure you read their data slates and don't make any assumptions as to how many powers they can use or how many powers that they know. We're going to demonstrate a bit of a psychic phase right now. We're going to pretend that it is the Imperium side, so the player on the left, it is their psychic phase. So what we do in the psychic phase is first we choose a Psyker and we choose the power that he's going to manifest. And so we have the Primaris Psyker. We'll say that he knows the Terrifying Visions special power, which allows him to subtract 2 from the leadership of an enemy unit within 18 inches of the Psyker. Now, every psychic power has a warp charge value. This number tells you what you have to roll on 2 dice in order to have the power be successful. Terrifying Visions, for example, has a warp charge value of 7. So the next thing I would do is I would take 2 dice and I would try to roll 7 or higher. In this case, I roll a 6, so the psychic power is not successful. Now, just because it's not successful doesn't mean that I can do it again. I cannot keep doing the same power. Since that Primaris Psyker can only cast 1 power, he's done, even though he failed to cast it. Now let's pretend for a second that I rolled exactly 7. That makes the psychic power successful. But before we go any further, the enemy, if they have Psychers, can attempt to deny the witch. In order to deny the witch, the enemy Psyker has to be within 24 inches of the Psyker that casts the power. So I select this one, the Malignant Plague Caster. He says he's allowed to deny 1 power per turn per enemy psychic phase. I'll check to make sure he's within 24 inches of the Primaris Psyker. He is. And then I tried to deny it. Now, in order to deny it, I also roll 2 dice, or I should say the Death Guard player also rolls 2 dice, and he has to beat the roll that the other Psyker did. So in this case, I rolled a 7, and so the Plague Caster has to roll higher than that. He rolls a 5 and fails to deny the witch. Now let's say he had rolled an 8 or higher. In that case, he would have successfully denied the witch, and that psychic power would not work at all. It just would not cast. It's as if it never manifested in the first place. If we were to continue on, the astropath could then be selected, and let's say that he knows the psychic barrier psychic power, which has a warp charge value of 6, so he has to roll 6 or higher on 2 dice. And if he manifests it, he can select a friendly Astra Militarum unit within 12 inches of the psyker, and until the start of your next psychic phase, add 1 to the unit saving throws. So he wants to give +1 armor or +1 saving throw to this group of infantry, just because he wants to keep them alive. It has a warp charge value of 6, so I have to roll 6 or higher. In this case, I rolled exactly 6. At this point, we would say, are there any deny the witches? Well, the Plaguecaster normally can deny the witch, but he is only allowed to do 1 per enemy psychic phase, and he's already done that 1, so he cannot actually roll. If there was another enemy psyker within 24 inches of that astropath who had not yet denied the witch and has the ability to do so, you could then select him and have him do it instead. One psychic power that is common to almost all psychers is the Smite psychic power. It is so common, in fact, that they include it in the core rulebook in the psychic phase. Smite has a warp charge value of 5. If it is manifested, the closest visible enemy unit within 18 inches of the psyker suffers D3 mortal wounds. Now, we'll get into mortal wounds in more detail later on, but essentially it's just they take that many wounds and they're not allowed to roll any saves or do anything else to prevent it, unless they have some special abilities to do so. If you actually roll more than 10, so you roll an 11 or a 12, then it does D6 mortal wounds instead. Now, it's still a psychic power, so if you can only cast 1 psychic power, then you can't cast one of the ones that you know plus Smite. It's just not allowed to do so. So let's say the astropath hadn't yet cast a psychic power, and he decides he wants to cast Smite. So he has to roll 5 or higher. He rolls an 8. So that did not get more than 10, but it still did successfully cast. The nearest enemy unit within 18 inches would be these Plague Marines. And so they would then suffer D3 mortal wounds. In this case, that's a 2, because remember for D3s, we divide a D6 in half, rounding up, and that gives us our number. So they would take 2 mortal wounds, and we won't talk about their disgustingly resilient special rule that allows them to ignore that. It would basically mean that they would lose 2 models of their choosing. They would just pull them off the table. If at any point you roll a double 1 or a double 6 when taking a psychic test, so not a deny the witch test, then you actually suffer what's called perils of the warp. Psychic powers in Warhammer 40k come from the chaos of the immaterium, the warp. And sometimes it backlashes. It's actually very dangerous to do that. If you roll a double 1 or double 6, the psyker suffers D3 mortal wounds as the forces of the demon-haunted warp claw at their mind. If the psyker is slain because of this, then the power they were trying to manifest does not work. So even though I rolled a 12 right here, because those symbols are 6s, and that would have actually successfully manifested, and if it was Smite, it would actually do D6 mortal wounds instead of D3. If I die because of perils of the warp, then that power does not go off. Furthermore, if the model is slain because of perils of the warp, each unit, every unit, enemy or friendly, within 6 inches immediately suffers D3 mortal wounds. So basically he explodes, or the warp kind of opens up around him and sucks a bunch of people into it. So I'd have to measure that 6 inches, so the Primaris Psyker is his own unit, this unit of infantry, this unit of infantry, and let's say that heavy weapon was his own squad. I'd roll a D3 for each of them, and they would take that many mortal wounds. It is actually incredibly devastating if you have a Perils in the Warp. Thankfully, it's only on double 1s or double 6s for the most part, and that is rare. That's only a 1 in, what would that be, 1 in 18 chance on 2d6. But if you're casting a lot of psychic powers, you are bound to see it at some point. And that's all there really is to the psychic phase. It's not a very complicated phase like it used to be. It is just streamlined, straightforward. You choose your psychic, choose a power, manifest it, your enemy attempts to deny it, and then you resolve it. Now there are a lot of different kinds of psychic powers out there. Every army has its own psychic discipline. Sometimes the army has multiple psychic disciplines. And so all the various effects of what they can do create the complexity that is the game. But how you use them is pretty straightforward. Some psychers give you bonuses to doing it. Some of them give you negatives to doing it. But in the end, choose a psyker, try to get the power off. Your enemy tries to stop you if he can. And if not, then you resolve the power exactly how it says in the text. It's as simple as that. We have a battle report for you. This one is going to focus a lot on psychers, so it's going to be a minimum of a few psychers per side. That way you can see all the interactions of casting psychic powers or manifesting psychic powers and denying the witch. Hopefully we see some perils of the warp. We're not going to fudge anything. We're going to make it a real game. So if perils of the warp happens, then you get to see it. If it doesn't, well, it's pretty straightforward how it happens. All of that is at the link in the video description below in the MiniWarGaming Vault. If you're not a Vault member, still click it, get a free 7-day trial, get access to everything in there. And of course, we'd love if you refer this series of videos to any of your friends who want to learn how to play Warhammer 40k 8th edition. Just tell them to go to miniwargaming.com/howtoplay40k, and they'll be able to see all the videos that we've posted there. And if there's more to come, then we'll post them on that page as well. Thanks so much for watching. Happy wargaming.